I am Joshua, 27, and my brother publicly humiliated me at his birthday dinner by calling me the adopted one in front of everyone. Before I tell you about the explosive truth that cost him absolutely everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments section down below. The restaurant was the kind of establishment where they do not print the prices on the menus and the lighting makes everyone look softer than they really are. It was an upscale Italian place right in the heart of downtown Chicago. The chandelier above our massive oak table looked like a cascade of shattered ice, catching the dim light and throwing shadows across the faces of my family. The wine glasses were so incredibly thin you felt like you were holding something fragile on purpose. I wore a sharp, tailored navy suit. I had saved up a substantial portion of my salary just to buy it because I wanted to feel confident for once, not invisible. I wanted to sit at that table and feel like I actually belonged there. I should have known that displaying any kind of confidence in front of my family would be taken as an open invitation for cruelty. My older brother, Julian, stood up with his glass. He tapped his heavy silver fork against the crystal. It was his 30th birthday, and my parents had spared absolutely no expense to celebrate their perfect son. Julian looked around the long table like a king surveying his loyal, adoring subjects. He was the golden child, the self-proclaimed successful entrepreneur who drove a pristine black Porsche and wore watches that cost more than a reliable car. His eyes flicked to me first. I felt a cold, familiar knot form deep in my stomach before he even opened his mouth. He smiled brightly at the table, raising his glass of vintage red wine, and said, "Cheers to our real family." He paused just long enough for everyone to lean in, waiting for the heartfelt sentiment. Then his eyes locked onto mine. Except the guy in the navy suit. He's just adopted. The laughter from his friends wasn't loud, but it was incredibly sharp. Every single head turned in my direction. Every smile waited eagerly to see if I would crack under the pressure. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a primal urge to stand up and shout, but I forced my muscles to relax. I didn't react. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I slowly picked up my fork, cut another piece of my steak, and kept eating like my dignity was not up for public discussion. I chewed my food calmly, acting as if his venomous words could not even reach me. That was the part Julian fundamentally didn't understand about me. I wasn't staying quiet because I was weak or intimidated. I was staying quiet because my mind was racing, calculating, and deciding exactly how I was going to handle him. 2 hours later, when the plates were finally cleared, the desserts were eaten, and everyone started standing up to get their coats, Julian smoothly slid a small, heavy black leather folder right across the white tablecloth. It stopped directly in front of my plate. He gave me a little arrogant grin that made the skin on the back of my neck go cold. I opened the folder. The bill stared back at me. $2,800. Julian tilted his head, his voice dripping with condescension. "Pay for it as my gift. Consider it a thank you to Mom and Dad for taking you in." In that exact moment, the reality of my entire life crystallized. He didn't just want to embarrass me with a bad joke. He wanted to own me in front of his wealthy friends. He wanted to prove that no matter what suit I wore, I was just the help. I looked at the staggering total, then back at him. I didn't rush. I didn't nervously fumble for my wallet or break into a sweat. I simply placed my hand on the leather folder and slid the bill back toward him. I didn't push it violently or dramatically, just firmly enough to make my point without making a scene. I looked up and caught the eye of the floor manager, a tall, professional guy named Luke who had been hovering near the wait station. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Can you check whose name the reservation is under?" Julian's smug eyes narrowed for half a second. I saw the gears turning in his head as he calculated whether he could still spin this completely back onto me. Luke nodded respectfully and stepped away to the host's stand at the front. When he returned a moment later, his tone was friendly but carried the heavy weight of restaurant policy. "The reservation is under Mr. Julian Cole," Luke stated clearly. "And per our policy for large private parties, we strictly process payment through the person who booked the table and placed the card on file." Julian's flawless smile twitched violently. A muscle in his jaw jumped. He glanced frantically around the table looking for backup, waiting for someone to laugh it off or for my parents to step in and save his pride. Nobody moved an inch. His friends suddenly became intensely fascinated with checking the screens of their phones. My parents stared fixedly at the expensive floral centerpiece like it might suddenly start talking to them. "Fine," Julian snapped, his voice a little too loud and incredibly sharp as he practically ripped his premium credit card out of his wallet. "I was just testing him. You know how sensitive he gets." I just sat back in my chair and watched him tap his card against the machine. I watched the reader beep loudly in the quiet room. I watched Luke thank him gracefully like absolutely nothing out of the ordinary had happened. It was a tiny, insignificant victory on paper, but I could feel the massive shift in the air. For once in his entire life, Julian had been forced to literally pay for the moment of cruelty he created. Outside the restaurant, the freezing Chicago night air hit my face like a physical wall. I took a deep, shaky breath, watching my breath turn into white clouds under the streetlights. Julian walked out through the revolving doors right behind me, his expensive leather shoes clicking fast and aggressively against the concrete pavement. His anger was slipping right through his carefully maintained, perfect posture. "You really embarrassed me in there," Julian hissed, stepping dangerously close to my personal space and keeping his voice low enough that our parents wouldn't hear him from the doorway. "You made me look incredibly cheap in front of my investors." I stopped walking. I slowly turned around to look him dead in the eye, refusing to back down a single inch. "You did that all by yourself, Julian." His jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might crack. For a split second, his hands balled into fists, and I genuinely thought he might actually throw a punch right there on the sidewalk. Instead, he heard the revolving doors spin again. He immediately turned toward our parents as they stepped out into the cold. Within a millisecond, he completely changed his face. He put on the wounded, victimized expression that had always worked flawlessly on them since we were kids. "Mom," Julian said, his voice suddenly going soft and heavily burdened. "Did you hear how Joshua just talked to me? After I invited him to celebrate with my friends." My mother, Martha, didn't even hesitate to process the situation. She marched directly over to me and grabbed my forearm. Her acrylic nails dug into the fabric of my suit jacket. She didn't grab me hard enough to leave a physical bruise, but it was more than hard enough to remind me exactly who she thought I belonged to. "Why do you always have to make everything so incredibly difficult?" she snapped, her eyes flashing with a familiar, deep-seated disappointment. "Tonight was your brother's 30th birthday. It is a milestone. You couldn't just do one nice thing, swallow your pride, and cover the dinner." I stared down at her hand gripping my arm. The neon lights from a nearby theater cast long, dark, ugly shadows across the sidewalk. My dad, Robert, stood exactly 3 feet away. His shoulders were hunched stiffly against the cold, and his eyes completely avoided mine. He was choosing a side by doing absolutely nothing, just like he always did whenever Julian decided to use me as a punching bag. "You know how your brother is?" my dad murmured quietly, waving his gloved hand in the air, as if that one tired sentence somehow erased decades of blatant, unchecked disrespect. I looked at the 3 of them standing together. They looked like a perfect, wealthy family portrait that never really had a space for me in the frame. I took a slow breath and forcefully pulled my arm completely free from my mother's tight grip. "And you know exactly how I am?" I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth. "I'm done." I didn't wait for a response. I turned my back on them, pulled my keys from my pocket, got into my car, and slammed the door shut. I started the engine and merged violently into the city traffic. The whole way back to my apartment, my phone sat in the passenger seat, lighting up the dark cabin with rapid-fire messages I completely refused to open. By the time I finally pulled into my parking garage, I already knew exactly what was coming next. They weren't upset that Julian had called me a fake family member. They were furious that, for the very first time, I refused to pay the physical and emotional price for his massive ego. Sitting in the heavy silence of my parked car, staring at the concrete wall, I reached over and picked up my phone. I opened my contacts. I clicked on Julian's name and hit block. Then I found my mother's contact. Block. Then my father's. Block. The silence in the car became absolutely deafening. But underneath the sting of rejection, it felt like pure, unadulterated freedom. I didn't know it yet as I sat in the dark, but this boundary I just drew was only the very first domino to fall in a chain reaction that would destroy everything they thought they knew. The next few weeks were strangely, wonderfully quiet. Nobody from my family came looking for me. Nobody showed up at my apartment to demand an apology. It gave me a lot of time to sit in my quiet living room and truly think about how my life had brought me to this exact breaking point. Growing up in the Cole household was like living as a permanent guest in a museum where you were strictly forbidden from touching the exhibits. The fact that I was adopted was never a celebrated thing. It was a weapon. The adoption papers were never kept hidden away in a safe. They were kept right on the very tip of my mother's tongue, ready to be deployed whenever she needed compliance. Whenever I asked for anything, a new pair of shoes for track practice, permission to go on a school trip, I was sharply reminded of my precarious place in the hierarchy. I vividly remember the day of my aunt's funeral. I was 12 years old, standing awkwardly in a stiff black suit that belonged to Julian 3 years prior. My mother was introducing Julian to extended family members as her brilliant, handsome boy. But when she introduced me, she specifically added, "And this is Joshua. We took him in when he had nowhere else to go." Even at a funeral, she couldn't let me just be a son. When Julian turned 18, my parents proudly handed him the entire college fund they had meticulously saved for nearly 2 decades. They bought him a brand new car with a giant red bow on it and paid the rent for his luxury off-campus apartment so he could, as they put it, focus entirely on his entrepreneurial dreams. Me, the day I turned 18, my mother handed me a suitcase and a list of affordable community colleges. I started working grueling night shifts at a massive data center just to earn a basic salary so I could afford my textbooks and a cramped studio apartment. I survived on ramen noodles and 4 hours of sleep for 4 straight years. I remember the bright, sunny day I finally graduated with my bachelor's degree in cybersecurity. My parents didn't show up to the ceremony. They said they were too busy attending a high-profile networking mixer Julian was hosting for his new startup. When I walked into their house later that evening, still wearing my graduation gown and proudly holding my hard-earned diploma, my mother barely looked up from the kitchen island. "We put a solid roof over your head for 18 years, Joshua," she said, sipping her white wine. "Be extremely grateful you even had the chance to go to school at all. You don't share our blood, so you are always going to have to work twice as hard to prove your worth in the real world." That single, devastating sentence stuck to my ribs for years. It became the fuel for the fire that drove me. It was the absolute reason I pushed myself relentlessly in my career. I climbed the corporate ladder with a vengeance, eventually stepping out to build my own highly successful cybersecurity consulting firm from the ground up. I secured massive, lucrative government contracts. I built a life of total, unbreakable financial independence because I was absolutely terrified of ever needing to ask them for a single dime. But no matter how successful I became, no matter how much money I made, to them, I was just the charity case forever sitting in the corner of their perfect family photos. I truly thought distancing myself would finally bring me peace. I thought blocking their numbers was the end of the story. But the universe has a very funny way of dragging you right back into the mess just when you think you are safely out. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting comfortably in my corner office, staring at a wall of monitors, running a complex vulnerability scan for a major corporate client. My lead security analyst and absolute best friend, Nathan, walked into my office carrying 2 steaming cups of black coffee. He set one down on my glass desk and noticed I was staring completely blankly at the code scrolling down my left monitor. "You're doing that thing again," Nathan said, leaning his tall frame casually against the doorframe. "The 1,000-yard stare. Let me guess. Did the royal family try to make contact from the mothership?" I shook my head, grabbing the coffee mug to warm my hands. "No, they have been completely silent since the birthday dinner disaster. But something feels fundamentally off. In my line of work, you learn very quickly to trust your gut instincts. When established patterns break, there is always a logical reason hiding underneath the surface. Julian absolutely thrived on attention. His total silence wasn't normal. It was a massive red flag. I swiveled my chair around, opened a secure, encrypted browser, and started doing exactly what I do best: digging for the truth. I didn't need to illegally hack into anything. People leave massive, glowing digital footprints if you just know exactly where to look in the public domain. Julian's company, Cole Innovations, had a flashy, expensive website full of trendy buzzwords and high-resolution stock photos of executives shaking hands. But when I pulled up the public civil court records and the state business filings registry, the shiny exterior peeled away immediately. There were 3 separate vendor disputes filed in the last 60 days alone. A massive financing statement indicated a major creditor had placed a severe lien on his physical business assets. Nathan walked up right behind my leather chair and looked closely at the screen. He let out a low, sharp whistle. Ouch! Your golden brother is burning through cash significantly faster than a California forest fire. Looks like he is desperately keeping the lights on with borrowed time. I leaned back, my eyes rapidly scanning the mounting red flags on the screen. Julian wasn't a highly successful CEO. He was a con artist playing dress-up, completely drowning in debt, and desperate to keep up his wealthy appearances at all costs. Just as my finger hovered over the mouse to close the investigative tabs, a loud ping echoed in the quiet office. An email notification popped up on my personal phone sitting on the desk. It wasn't from Julian, and it wasn't from my parents. It was from my older cousin, Cameron. We hadn't spoken a single word to each other since a family funeral over 2 years ago. The subject line of the email read, "Emergency. We really need to talk about Julian right now." I frowned and tapped the screen to open the email. It was frantic, poorly typed, and desperate. She claimed Julian was in way over his head, that my parents were stressed beyond belief, and she practically begged me to meet her for an emergency lunch the very next day. A cold, heavy sense of dread washed entirely over me, settling deep in my chest. Julian's sinking ship wasn't just going down quietly. It was starting to aggressively pull other people down into the dark water with him. I agreed to meet Cameron at a crowded, noisy diner downtown the following afternoon. The smell of cheap frying oil and stale coffee hung heavy in the air. When I walked to the back booth, Cameron looked absolutely exhausted. Her expensive makeup was slightly smudged under her eyes, and her hands were wrapped so tightly around a thick ceramic coffee mug that her knuckles were entirely white. The moment I slid into the vinyl booth across from her, she didn't even say hello. She just launched straight into her performance. "Joshua, thank God you came," she whispered urgently, leaning her body aggressively across the sticky table. "You have absolutely no idea how incredibly bad things are at home right now. Aunt Martha and Uncle Robert are completely falling apart. Julian's business took a slight, unexpected hit with the market downturn, and the stress is literally killing your parents." I kept my face perfectly neutral, not giving her a single ounce of the emotional reaction she was digging for. "A slight hit? Cameron, public court records clearly show he has multiple heavy liens on his equipment and lawsuits pending from suppliers." Cameron waved her hand dismissively, trying to brush away the concrete facts. "It is just a temporary cash flow problem. Everyone goes through it. But Joshua, they desperately need your help. You make great money now with your fancy tech stuff. If you just pulled some cash from your corporate savings, maybe gave Julian a small short-term loan, it would entirely save the family. Think of everything they did for you. They gave you a home when nobody else wanted you." I sat perfectly still and stared at her. She was shamelessly using the exact same emotional manipulation tactics my mother had used on me for my entire life. But I wasn't a scared 20-year-old kid anymore. While she was rambling on, aggressively trying to trigger my guilt, I casually pulled out my phone beneath the table. I quickly pulled up the public investor registry document for Julian's latest so-called funding round that I had found the night before. I rapidly scrolled past the fake corporate LLC names until I hit the list of individual contributors. There it was, printed in black and white. Cameron Davis, $50,000. I slowly brought my phone up and set it face up right in the middle of the table. You didn't call me here because you care about my parents' failing health, Cameron. She stopped speaking mid-sentence. Her mouth hung slightly open as her eyes dropped directly to the glowing screen. You gave him 50 grand, I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any sympathy. You are an unsecured individual investor. You know his fake company is completely tanking, and you are trying to manipulate me into giving him my money, so he has enough liquid cash to pay you back before he officially files for bankruptcy. Her face went completely pale, then flushed with a violent, angry red. The sweet, highly concerned cousin routine vanished in less than a second. Her mouth formed a tight, furious line. He absolutely promised me a guaranteed 30% return, she hissed, slamming the palm of her hand violently on the diner table, making the silverware rattle. I used my kid's entire college fund for this, Joshua. You owe this family. You have more than enough money. Just fix it. I calmly stood up from the booth, buttoning my suit jacket. I casually tossed a crisp $5 bill on the table to cover my black coffee and walked right out the door, leaving her sputtering and completely alone in the booth. Cut the ridiculous act, Julian, I said, looking at the time. I have things to do. What do you want? He chuckled nervously, the sound tight in his throat, and adjusted his stiff white cuffs. Always straight to business. I deeply respect that about you. Look, I am massively expanding my operations globally. I have huge premium client pipelines opening up in Europe. But my accounting department is, well, it's a bit messy right now. I critically need someone with your high-level technical skills. I want to officially offer you a massive promotion in life. Come work for me as my chief security officer. You can help me completely organize the digital books, secure the servers. It will come with a massive six-figure salary. I stared at him, genuinely in awe of his sheer audacity. You want me to fix your books? Julian, I know you have multiple vendor disputes, lawsuits, and severe asset liens. Your business isn't expanding globally. It is literally collapsing by the hour. His fake smile faltered instantly. A flash of genuine, wide-eyed panic crossed his eyes before he quickly masked it with defensive anger. He leaned in dangerously close over the small table, lowering his voice to an aggressive whisper. Don't sit there and act like you are somehow better than me, he spat venomously. I just need you to move some digital files around. Encrypt some specific financial data so the state auditors don't get confused by the complex corporate structure. Once my massive new funding round officially clears the bank next month, everyone gets paid out. You can make this all completely disappear with a few keystrokes. My stomach turned violently. He didn't want an employee. He wanted a highly skilled accomplice. He wanted me to use my hard-earned cybersecurity credentials to illegally hide his massive financial fraud. You want me to literally commit a federal felony for you? I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. It's absolutely not a felony. It is corporate restructuring, he argued, his face turning an angry, blotchy red. Come on, Joshua. You owe me. Who exactly do you think convinced Mom and Dad to keep you around when you were a difficult teenager and things got incredibly tough? I felt my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. You loudly taught me I am not real family, Julian. You literally toasted to it. So do not ask me to carry your criminal mess. I grabbed my heavy winter coat and stood up. Julian slammed his clenched fist violently onto the table, rattling the half-empty coffee cups and drawing stares from the nearby customers. If you walk away from me right now, you are completely dead to this family. You hear me? He yelled, totally losing control. You will have absolutely nothing. I already have nothing from you, I replied evenly. And I am completely fine with that. I turned and walked out into the busy street, leaving him fuming in the corner. The dominoes began falling significantly faster than even I had analytically anticipated. Exactly 1 week after our tense Starbucks meeting, the very first major lawsuit hit the public court records. Matthew, a massive corporate hardware supplier out of Texas, officially sued Julian's company, Cole Innovations, for severe fraud and blatant breach of contract. The news rapidly hit the local business journals. I quietly watched it all unfold from the secure safety of my corner office. Julian's carefully constructed, fake world was completely disintegrating in real time. Dylan, his exceptionally slick business partner who loved posing for photos with him, abruptly and publicly resigned. Dylan released a carefully worded legal statement claiming he had absolutely zero knowledge of the alleged financial mismanagement. Wyatt, Julian's right-hand man and his absolute biggest cheerleader on social media, completely scrubbed his Instagram and LinkedIn profiles of any photos or mentions ever involving Julian. They were simply rats frantically fleeing a rapidly sinking ship. I sat comfortably in my office with my personal corporate lawyer, Gabriel. Gabriel was a sharp, brilliant, no-nonsense guy who aggressively handled all my high-level corporate contracts and acquisitions. I slid a thick, heavily tabbed file across my glass desk to him. Julian's corporate assets are going to be completely liquidated by the bankruptcy court within the month, I told Gabriel directly. High-end servers, proprietary software algorithms, extensive client lists. His company is legally dead in the water, but the tech infrastructure underneath the mess is extremely solid. I want to buy it entirely. Gabriel raised a skeptical eyebrow, slowly flipping through the highly detailed financial documents. You want to intentionally buy your brother's liquidated assets out of bankruptcy? It is a brilliant, highly strategic business move for Zenith, Joshua, but it is going to cause an absolute bloodbath in your family dynamic. I genuinely do not care about the family bloodbath anymore, I said, looking out my large office window at the city skyline. I only care about strategically building my company's infrastructure. Handle all the necessary legal paperwork quietly. Use our secondary holding LLC to make the bid. I absolutely do not want my personal name attached to this acquisition until the ink is completely dry and the judge signs off. Gabriel nodded slowly, tapping his pen on the file. Understood completely. The bankruptcy court is aggressively fast-tracking the sale to rapidly pay off the highly secured creditors. If we bid aggressively, we will definitively have the keys to the servers by Friday. I felt a dark, satisfying sense of pure vindication. I wasn't maliciously destroying Julian. He had already done that to himself. I was just smartly picking up the valuable pieces he so carelessly threw away. But a persistent, nagging feeling in the deep back of my analytical mind told me a narcissist like Julian wouldn't just go down quietly without desperately trying to take someone else down with him. If he was truly this utterly desperate for cash, who else had he compromised? That night, my instincts screamed at me so loudly I couldn't ignore them. I drove my car through the pouring rain straight to my parents' large house in the wealthy suburbs. The wide driveway was completely empty. Julian's precious Porsche was nowhere to be seen. I marched up the steps and knocked loudly on the heavy oak front door, pounding forcefully until the porch light finally flicked on. My mother opened the door just a crack. Her face looked incredibly pale, drawn, and exhausted. When she saw through the crack that it was me standing there in the rain, she immediately tried to slam the heavy door right in my face. "We have absolutely nothing to say to you," she said, her voice shaking violently. I aggressively shoved the thick sole of my leather boot into the doorframe, stopping the door from closing. "Where is Dad? You need to let me inside right now. This is an absolute emergency." Hearing the commotion, my father walked slowly into the grand hallway. He looked at least 10 years older than the very last time I saw him at the restaurant. I forcefully pushed past my mother and walked straight into the formal living room. "Have you thoroughly checked your personal bank accounts this week?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the quiet house. My mother quickly crossed her arms protectively over her chest. "Julian expertly handles our retirement accounts. He is aggressively growing our portfolio in the market. Not that our finances are any of your business, Joshua. Walk over to the desk and open your laptop," I commanded, pointing directly to the antique desk sitting in the corner of the room. "Right now. Do it." The sheer, Undeniable authority in my voice made my father flinch physically. He walked slowly over to the desk, opened the silver laptop, and logged directly into their main banking portal. I stood right behind him, keeping my hands completely off the keyboard. The screen slowly loaded the dashboard. My father let out a sudden, horrific sound that I can only accurately describe as a dying gasp. The primary checking account was completely, utterly drained. $0. But that wasn't even the worst part. Under the Liabilities tab on the right side of the screen, there was a massive, terrifying six-figure home equity line of credit that absolutely hadn't been there a month ago. "What in God's name is this?" my mother whispered, her hands trembling violently as she pointed a shaking finger at the glaring red numbers on the screen. "We entirely own this house outright. We proudly paid off the last of the mortgage 5 years ago." I leaned in and firmly clicked on the loan's transaction details. The massive funds had been transferred instantly and directly to a hidden shell company fully owned by Julian. I knew exactly what that stolen money had bought him. "He blatantly forged your signatures on the digital documents," I said, the horrifying reality of his sociopathy making my blood run completely cold. "He leveraged your entire house to the bank. That brand new, shiny black Porsche sitting in his driveway? Your house paid for it. His luxury vacations to Europe? Completely paid for by your retirement funds." My father collapsed heavily into the leather desk chair, burying his pale face deeply in his shaking hands. He began to weep. It was a guttural, devastating, utterly heartbreaking sound. My mother backed slowly away from the desk, shaking her head wildly in complete denial. No, Julian would never do this to us. There is a bank mistake. He is a good boy. He loves us. He violently stole from you," I said, my voice dangerously, chillingly calm. "You need to call the police right now, and we need to go to the bank first thing tomorrow morning before he completely drains whatever is left." The next morning, the air inside the sleek, modern bank branch was suffocatingly tense. We sat stiffly in the glass-walled office of Carter, the highly experienced branch manager. My parents looked exactly like hollowed-out ghosts, staring blankly at the floor. I had forcefully made my father call Julian early that morning and angrily demand he meet us here at the bank, pretending it was just a simple, routine paperwork issue regarding a signature. Julian confidently walked into the busy branch exactly 10 minutes late, holding a designer iced coffee, looking thoroughly annoyed that his incredibly important schedule had been interrupted. When he swaggered into the office and saw me sitting calmly next to our devastated parents, his entire arrogant demeanor completely vanished. He froze solidly in the doorway. "What exactly is he doing here?" Julian demanded, glaring at me with pure hatred. "Sit down, Julian," Carter said sharply. Carter's voice was entirely devoid of any typical customer service warmth. Carter slid a thick, heavy stack of printed legal documents aggressively across the polished mahogany desk. "We are deeply reviewing the massive home equity loan secretly taken out against your parents' property. The specific one you fraudulently authorized via digital signature." Julian sat down stiffly in the leather chair. "I am legally acting as their financial proxy. It was a highly sophisticated investment strategy designed to maximize their returns. An investment strategy that fully funded a luxury sports car and instantly transferred $80,000 to a shady offshore account?" Carter fired back without missing a beat. "Mr. Cole, your parents have stated clearly on the official record today that they never signed these loan documents. Furthermore, the IP address used to authorize the loan tracks back directly to your company's office router." Julian's face went chalk white. The blood completely drained from his lips. He looked desperately at my mother, his eyes pleading for salvation. "Mom, please tell them. Tell them you explicitly gave me verbal permission. I just needed some quick runway to bridge a gap. The business is about to take off massively. I'll pay you back double by next month." My mother slowly looked at him. For the very first time in her entire life, the grand illusion completely shattered. She didn't see the perfect golden child anymore. She vividly saw the desperate man who was entirely willing to let her die homeless in the street just to maintain his fragile, wealthy ego. She turned her head away in disgust and began to cry quietly into her hands. "You ruthlessly stole our house?" my father choked out, his knuckles completely white as his hands violently gripped the armrests of his chair. "You stole absolutely everything we worked for our entire lives." Julian completely panicked. He stood up aggressively, knocking his heavy chair backward onto the carpet. "I didn't steal anything from anyone. It's my rightful inheritance anyway. I was just taking it a little early. And my company has massive assets. I have highly expensive servers. I have proprietary software. I have massive client databases worth millions. I'll easily sell it all and pay the stupid bank back tomorrow morning." Right on his desperate cue, the heavy glass door to the manager's office swung open. Gabriel, my lawyer, stepped smoothly inside. He wore a sharp, intimidating gray suit and carried a sleek black leather briefcase. He walked with total confidence directly over to me and handed me a thick, court-certified folder with a red seal. "Sorry I'm a bit late, Joshua," Gabriel said smoothly, his eyes briefly flicking to Julian. "The bankruptcy judge just signed the final binding orders." Julian looked wildly at Gabriel, utterly confused and entirely cornered. "Who the hell are you?" Gabriel turned to Julian with a highly polite, utterly devastating smile. "I represent Zenith Security Solutions. As of 9 o'clock exactly this morning, the Federal Bankruptcy Court has officially approved the total liquidation of Cole Innovations to partially satisfy your massive secured creditors." "So what?" Julian sneered, sweating profusely now, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "I will simply negotiate an aggressive buyback with the new buyers." "You absolutely don't have to," I said, slowly standing up from my chair. I opened the court folder and tossed the legally binding title deed directly onto the desk, right in front of his face. "You can just negotiate with me." Julian stared blankly at the thick paper. His eyes darted frantically from the Zenith logo on the top of the document to my calm face. The horrifying realization hit his brain like a physical, crushing blow to the chest. "Zenith," Julian breathed out, his voice shaking uncontrollably. That's your company." "I bought it all, Julian," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the small glass office. "I bought your precious servers. I bought your supposedly brilliant software. I bought your entire client list for absolute pennies on the dollar at the court auction. You completely failed. You do not have a company anymore. You do not have any assets to sell. You have absolutely nothing." Julian lunged violently forward, his hands slamming aggressively onto the mahogany desk. "You maliciously planned this. You deliberately stole my entire company from me." "I didn't steal a single thing," I replied coldly, staring him down. "I legally bought the massive garbage pile you left behind because you were too busy criminally spending our parents' retirement funds to actually run a real business." Through the clear glass walls of the bank office, I clearly saw a local police cruiser pull rapidly up to the front doors of the bank, lights flashing. Two uniformed officers stepped out quickly, followed closely by a man wearing a bright vest and holding a clipboard. A large, heavy-duty tow truck backed aggressively into the parking lot, pulling right up to the bumper of Julian's shiny black Porsche. Julian saw it happen too, all the remaining life completely drained from his eyes. He stumbled backward, hitting the glass wall hard. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please like the video and leave a comment below to let me know you've been with me. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. The police officers did not aggressively tackle and arrest Julian inside the busy bank lobby, but they firmly handed him a massive court summons for criminal financial fraud right there in front of the horrified bank tellers and customers. He stood completely frozen, watching helplessly out the window as the loud tow truck violently dragged his ultimate symbol of massive success away down the busy street. He looked exactly like a broken, terrified child, completely stripped of his arrogant armor. He didn't say another single word to us. He just turned around and walked out through the automatic doors into the street, entirely alone. Back at my parents' house later that long, exhausting afternoon, the dark atmosphere was exactly like a funeral. The massive house they had proudly lived in for over 30 years now felt exactly like a suffocating trap closing in on them. We sat quietly around the large oak kitchen table. The silence was incredibly heavy, thick, and suffocating. My mother kept rubbing her temples, staring blankly at the wood grain. Suddenly, she reached desperately across the table and tried to grab my hand. I pulled it back instinctively, leaning away from her touch. "Joshua," she sobbed loudly, thick tears streaming steadily down her wrinkled, tired face. "I am so incredibly, deeply sorry. We were so utterly blind to it all. He was our precious firstborn, and we just desperately wanted him to succeed so badly. We treated you terribly for your entire life. Please, I am begging you, forgive us." I looked at her crying face. 10 years ago, I would have gladly done absolutely anything to hear those exact words fall from her lips. I would have moved literal mountains just to finally get an apology, to feel like I actually belonged in this family. But sitting there right now, watching them break, I realized the desperate craving for their approval was completely, permanently gone. I didn't feel fiercely angry anymore, but I certainly didn't feel an overwhelming sense of love or connection, either. I just felt incredibly, deeply tired. "I forgive you, Mom," I said quietly, meaning it. "But a late apology absolutely doesn't fix the massive mortgage fraud he committed against you." My father stared blankly down at his empty coffee mug. He looked entirely defeated, completely stripped of his fatherly pride and authority. "We actively kept choosing fake peace over the hard truth," he admitted, his voice cracking with deep shame. "We let him walk all over us entirely because we were so afraid of him getting angry and leaving us. And we cruelly made you pay the heavy price for it. Now we are going to lose our home." I took a deep, centering breath. This was the defining, ultimate moment of my entire life. I had the complete financial power to just pull out my checkbook, write a massive check, pay off the fraudulent bank loan, and save the day. I could finally, truly be the golden hero they always wanted Julian to be. But doing that would only definitively prove that I was still desperately buying their affection. I calmly pulled a sleek, black business card out of my wallet and set it firmly on the kitchen table in front of my weeping mother. It was Gabriel's card. "Gabriel is an absolutely excellent, ruthless lawyer," I told them clearly. "He specializes specifically in severe elder financial abuse and massive corporate fraud. I have already fully paid his extensive retainer fee out of my own pocket. He is going to fiercely represent you in the upcoming civil suit against Julian to try and legally recover the house and your stolen retirement funds." My mother looked up, a sudden bright glimmer of desperate hope flashing in her tear-filled eyes. "You're paying for the lawyer? You're going to save the house." "I am strictly paying for the top-tier legal representation," I clarified firmly, shattering her assumption. "I will make absolutely sure you do not have to navigate the complex, terrifying court system entirely alone. But I am absolutely not paying off Julian's massive, fraudulent debt. I am not writing a blank check to the bank. You willingly allowed him to have complete, unchecked custody of your entire finances without any oversight. That was your choice, and now you have to fully deal with the heavy consequences of it." My father nodded slowly, tears still in his eyes. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He knew I was absolutely right. "Are you going to at least come stay with us?" my mother asked, her voice small, almost pleading. "Just until this terrible situation blows over?" I stood up slowly from the table. I looked around the large, beautiful kitchen, the room where I had eaten hundreds of silent meals, feeling exactly like an uninvited, unwanted guest. "No," I said firmly, my voice echoing slightly. "I have my own life. I have a rapidly growing company to run. I will check in on you occasionally, and Gabriel will strictly handle the massive legal mess." But I am absolutely not moving backward into this house. I walked with purpose to the front door. Neither of them tried to stop me or beg me to stay. As I stepped out onto the front porch, pulling my coat tight against the cold, I felt the crushing, heavy weight of my entire childhood finally slide completely off my shoulders. I had finally drawn an unbreakable iron boundary. I protected them from total legal ruin, but I fiercely protected myself first. I wasn't the adopted kid begging for scraps of love anymore. I was a man who knew his own unshakable worth, and I was never going to let anyone discount it ever again. Exactly 1 year and 2 months passed since the day I walked out of my parents' front door and left them to face the brutal reality of my brother's financial crimes. Time has a funny way of clarifying things. When you remove yourself from a highly toxic environment, you do not just heal. You actually get to meet the person you were supposed to be all along. My company, Zenith Security Solutions, experienced a massive period of explosive growth. It turned out that the high-end servers and proprietary software algorithms I bought at the bankruptcy auction from Julian's liquidated company were incredibly valuable once they were actually put in the hands of competent engineers. We integrated his former tech infrastructure entirely into our own network. I used the very tools he squandered to secure 3 major federal contracts within 6 months. We moved into a gorgeous new office space in downtown Chicago, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. I remember standing in the climate-controlled server room one late Friday afternoon, listening to the steady, powerful hum of the massive server racks. My lead analyst, Nathan, walked in holding a clipboard. He patted the side of a sleek black server tower that still had a faded inventory sticker from Cole Innovations on the back panel. All systems are fully integrated and running at maximum capacity, Nathan said, checking a box on his list. I have to admit, Joshua, buying his liquidated assets for pennies on the dollar was the best corporate acquisition we ever made. Your brother might have been a complete fraud as a businessman, but he had incredibly expensive taste in hardware. I smiled slightly, looking at the blinking green lights. He always loved the shiny exterior. He just never cared about building a solid foundation underneath it. My foundation, on the other hand, was absolutely rock solid. I had finally built a life that required no one's permission and sought no one's applause. I gave myself the promotion I deserved. I paid my employees a generous salary. I was completely at peace. As for my parents, their reality looked vastly different. Gabriel, the ruthless corporate lawyer I hired to represent them, fought an absolute war in the civil courts for 10 agonizing months. Gabriel managed to prove that Julian had maliciously forged their signatures and committed severe financial fraud. However, the legal victory was bittersweet. While they were not held criminally liable for Julian's massive debts, the bank still foreclosed on the large suburban house. The stolen money was already gone, funneled away into Julian's lavish lifestyle and terrible investments. My parents had to sell almost all their expensive furniture, their antique art, and the luxury cars they had proudly driven for years just to cover the remaining tax liabilities. They moved out of the wealthy suburbs and rented a modest, 2-bedroom apartment in a much quieter, working-class neighborhood. My mother, who had not worked a single day since I was adopted, had to take a part-time job as a cashier at a local bakery to help pay the monthly rent. My father, who used to boast to his country club friends about his massive retirement portfolio, started driving a delivery truck 3 days a week to afford their basic groceries. I did not abandon them entirely, but I strictly maintained the iron boundary I had set that night in their kitchen. I called them once a week on Sunday afternoons. The conversations were polite, incredibly brief, and completely devoid of the old emotional manipulation. They never once asked me for money. Gabriel had made it exceptionally clear to them that my financial support ended at his legal retainer fee. During one of our Sunday calls, my father sounded exhausted but strangely grounded. "Your mother brought home some day-old bread from the bakery today," he told me over the phone. "It's hard work, Joshua. My back aches constantly, but we are managing. We are learning how to live within our actual means." He paused for a long moment. The line was quiet. "I drove past your new office building downtown yesterday while I was on my delivery route," my father said quietly. It looks incredibly impressive. I just wanted to say that I am proud of you. I know I never said that when you were growing up, but I am saying it now. I sat at my desk, looking out at the city. 10 years ago, that sentence would have made me cry. Now, it just felt like a simple statement of fact. Thank you, Dad, I replied evenly. I appreciate that. They were finally learning how to respect me from afar. It was a hard, painful lesson for them, but it was the only way we could ever have any semblance of a relationship moving forward. They lost their golden child, but in the process, they were finally forced to acknowledge the son they had treated like a ghost. While my parents were quietly rebuilding their lives from the ground up, Julian was experiencing the absolute destruction of his. The criminal justice system moves slowly, but when it finally strikes, it strikes with devastating precision. Julian's criminal fraud trial was a massive, humiliating spectacle. He walked into the courtroom looking nothing like the arrogant, wealthy entrepreneur who had confidently demanded I pay a $2,000 dinner bill just a year prior. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit. He looked pale, exhausted, and utterly terrified. He had boldly pleaded not guilty, banking on a secret offshore account he thought he had successfully hidden from the federal investigators. He planned to use those stolen funds to hire a high-powered defense attorney and drag the case out for years. But Julian severely underestimated the absolute ruthlessness of the people he chose to surround himself with. The biggest twist of the entire ordeal did not come from the prosecutors. It came from Dylan and Wyatt, Julian's former slick business partner, and his social media right-hand man. When the federal investigators started circling Cole Innovations, Dylan and Wyatt didn't just resign and walk away quietly. They realized Julian was going down, and they aggressively decided to save themselves. They struck a massive immunity deal with the federal prosecutors. In exchange for total legal immunity, Dylan and Wyatt handed over the encrypted hard drives containing all of Julian's illegal financial transactions, offshore account numbers, and fake vendor invoices. But they didn't stop there. Before they handed over the digital keys, Dylan and Wyatt completely drained the hidden offshore accounts. They stole the remaining stolen money right out from under Julian's nose, transferred it through untraceable cryptocurrency exchanges, and vanished entirely. By the time Julian tried to access his emergency funds to pay his lawyer, the accounts were at absolute zero. I actually attended the second day of the trial. I sat quietly in the back row of the courtroom. I watched Julian's face when Dylan confidently took the witness stand. Julian looked absolutely betrayed, his mouth hanging open in shock as his former best friend coldly and methodically detailed every single illegal action Julian had ever taken. Dylan looked right at Julian and threw him completely under the bus without a single ounce of hesitation. Julian had spent his entire life valuing fake loyalty and buying his friends with expensive dinners and VIP access. In the end, those exact same friends happily sold his freedom for a plea deal and a payout. Because of the overwhelming evidence provided by Dylan, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Julian was found guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and severe elder financial abuse. He narrowly avoided a lengthy federal prison sentence only because it was his first offense and the judge took pity on his severe panic attacks in the courtroom. Instead of prison, Julian was sentenced to 5 years of strict probation, mandated to pay massive financial restitution to the bank for the rest of his natural life, and ordered to complete 2,000 hours of manual community service. He now had a permanent, severe felony record. No corporate company would ever hire him. No bank would ever approve him for a loan. His reputation in the business world was completely, permanently annihilated. A few months after the trial concluded, Nathan sent me a photo he had discreetly taken while buying supplies for a home renovation project. The photo showed Julian wearing a bright orange apron, pushing a massive line of heavy metal shopping carts across the asphalt parking lot of a local home improvement warehouse. He looked utterly defeated, sweating under the hot afternoon sun, taking orders from a teenage shift manager. The golden child was now earning minimum wage, sweeping floors, and collecting shopping carts. Karma did not just knock on Julian's door, kicked the door completely off the hinges, walked inside, and took absolutely everything he owned. A week after Nathan sent me that photo, I walked down to my apartment lobby to check my mail. Interspersed with the usual corporate catalogs and utility bills was a plain white envelope. My name and address were handwritten on the front in messy, rushed handwriting. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Julian's. I took the envelope upstairs, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and sat down at my kitchen island. I stared at the sealed envelope for a long time. Part of me wanted to throw it directly into the trash shredder. But another part of me needed to see exactly what he had to say from the absolute bottom of the pit he dug for himself. I grabbed a knife, sliced the envelope open, and unfolded the single sheet of lined notebook paper inside. The letter was not a perfect, eloquent apology. It was messy, slightly defensive in places, and completely unpolished. But buried right in the middle of his rambling paragraphs was a single line of absolute, raw honesty. Julian wrote, "I hated you, Joshua. I hated you from the day Mom and Dad brought you home. I hated that you could just sit in your room and be okay with being alone. I spent my entire life performing for them, begging them to look at me, bankrupting myself just to hear people clap when I walked into a room. And you never needed any of it. I hated how easily you survived without needing their applause. And I hate myself for needing it so badly that it ruined my entire life." I read that paragraph 3 times. I ran my thumb over the blue ink. For 27 years, I thought my family treated me terribly because I was inherently flawed. I thought the fact that I was adopted meant I was a secondary character in their lives, a charity case that was physically incapable of earning their true love. I killed myself trying to prove my worth, trying to show them I was smart enough, successful enough, and good enough to belong at their dinner table. But reading Julian's letter, the final piece of the puzzle violently snapped into place. They didn't mistreat me because I was weak or unworthy. They mistreated me because I was independent. My ability to exist without their constant validation terrified them. Julian needed to be worshipped to feel alive, and my parents needed to be needed to feel important. Their entire toxic dynamic was built on a fragile foundation of mutual dependency. By stepping out of that dynamic, by refusing to play their games, I became a mirror reflecting all of their massive insecurities back at them. I didn't write back to Julian. I didn't text him. I didn't try to seek him out at his retail job to gloat or offer a condescending hand of forgiveness. I simply folded the piece of notebook paper, walked over to my home office, and dropped it directly into the paper shredder. I listened to the satisfying sound of the machine grinding the paper into tiny, unreadable strips. Some doors absolutely do not need to be reopened just to prove that you have successfully healed. Sometimes, the most powerful response you can possibly give to someone who tried to destroy you is total, uninterrupted silence. I walked out onto my apartment balcony and looked out over the sprawling city. The air was crisp and clean. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel the heavy, suffocating shadow of the Cole family looming over my shoulders. I was completely free. I learned the absolute hardest way possible that family is not defined by matching DNA, shared bloodlines, or a stack of legal adoption paperwork sitting in a dusty drawer. True family is entirely about mutual respect. If someone only treats you well when you are financially useful to them, or when you are quietly submitting to their massive ego, that is absolutely not love. That is control. That is emotional hostage-taking disguised as kinship. The absolute strongest revenge you can ever take against toxic people is not screaming at them in public. It is not humiliating them back, or actively trying to ruin their lives. Toxic people will inevitably ruin their own lives because their foundation is built on lies and manipulation. The greatest revenge is refusing to be owned. It is building a life so incredibly solid, so financially and emotionally secure, that their petty opinions and cruel jokes cannot even shake the floorboards. It is looking them dead in the eye when they demand you pay for their ego, and calmly sliding the bill right back across the table. If you have ever been the one in your family or friend group who is constantly treated like an outsider, if you are the one who is always expected to swallow your pride to keep the fake peace, I want you to remember this story. You absolutely do not have to beg for a temporary seat at a table that consistently cuts you down to size. You have the ultimate power to stand up, walk out the door, and build your own damn table. Sometimes the absolute best, most valuable gift you can ever give yourself is walking away, drawing an iron line in the sand, and letting the absolute truth do what it always does eventually. The truth always collects its heavy price. Now, before I sign off, I want to leave you with a crucial lesson that goes far beyond my personal story. This is the educational takeaway I want you to hold on to when you face manipulative people in your own life. Toxicity thrives in the dark spaces of compliance. When toxic individuals, whether they are siblings, parents, or bosses, push your boundaries, they are constantly testing the structural integrity of your self-worth. They rely heavily on your fear of conflict and your deep desire for approval to force you into submission. The moment you stop reacting emotionally and start responding analytically, you completely disarm them. You must understand that establishing firm, unyielding boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You cannot control how manipulative people behave, but you have absolute 100% control over how much access you grant them to your life, your finances, and your mental peace. Stop setting yourself on fire just to keep other people warm. Let them learn how to build their own fires. I really want to hear from you now. What was the most impactful lesson you took away from this story? How have you handled setting strict boundaries with difficult people in your own life? Drop your thoughts in the comments down below so we can discuss it. Or, if this story truly resonated with you and you simply agree with the lessons shared today, just drop the word "good" in the comments. It lets me know that my experiences have brought value to your day. Thank you so much for listening, for standing by me through this journey, and for being part of a community that values truth and respect. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.